She rescued the most feared mountain man from Quicksand. What he suggested as payment shocked her. A woman rides through the wild Colorado hills until she sees him. The most feared mountain man in the territory, sinking fast in a pit of quicksand. Everyone said he was a killer, a ghost, a man no one should save. But she throws him a rope anyway and hauls him back from death. When he opens his eyes, his words freeze her blood. He says he owes her, and what he suggests as payment isn't gold or goods. It's something far more dangerous. Now the woman who saved a stranger must decide if she's rescued a man or invited a curse into her home. Because the law's riding after him, the railroads claiming her land, and secrets buried in the mountains are about to surface. Why would the most feared man in the West risk his life for her? And when his past catches up, will her act of mercy become her greatest miracle or her downfall? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The river ran quiet that afternoon, slow and brown with spring thaw. Cottonwood fluff drifted in the warm air. The high peaks still held snow, but down in the San Juan Valley, new green shoots pushed through the wet ground. A woman's voice hummed softly between the trees, gentle and steady like the river's own song. Chloe Boone guided her mule, Maple, along the muddy trail. A basket hung from the saddle, already half filled with willow bark and yarrow stems. Her fingers were red from stripping bark. She worked slow and careful. Every few minutes she lifted her head to scan the riverbank for more herbs or signs of bear. She liked these quiet hours. They were the only time her heart didn't ache with the weight of the past winter. Alone in that cabin since her husband's fever took him. The hills gave her company that didn't speak or judge. She whispered to them sometimes anyway. "Almost done, Maple," she said. The mule flicked an ear but kept plodding. That was when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A groan, low and desperate, then a wet, sucking noise. Chloe froze, scanning the reeds. "Hello?" she called. No answer, only another groan, louder this time, followed by a splash. She stepped closer. The smell of mud thickened. The bank dipped toward a patch of still water that shimmered too smooth. Then she saw him. A man, huge, bearded and half-submerged, was sinking into the riverbank's quicksand. His arms strained above his head, covered in sludge. His face twisted in panic, then went still as exhaustion overtook him. For one heartbeat, Chloe couldn't move. She knew that face from whispers at the mercantile. The mountain man who lived beyond Red Hollow, the one folks called the Butcher of Broken Knife Ridge. They said he'd killed 3 men in one night and vanished into the high country. Every instinct screamed to turn back. But then he made a small sound, not a growl, not a curse, but a human whimper. That broke something in her fear. She dropped her basket and ran for the wagon. Her rope lay coiled under the seat. With shaking hands, she tied one end around a willow trunk and threw the other toward him. "Grab it!" she shouted. The man's eyes flicked open, dull with mud. He tried once, missed, then caught the rope with trembling fingers. Chloe braced her heels and hauled back. The rope bit into her palms, tearing skin. "Don't fight it," she cried. "Let me pull you steady." The weight nearly dragged her forward, but she leaned with her whole body, grunting through tears. Inch by inch, he slid free, collapsing onto firmer ground with a gasp that rattled his chest. Chloe fell beside him, breathing hard. Mud streaked her dress, and her arms shook like she'd wrestled a bear. The man coughed up brown water and lay still. She touched his neck. A pulse. Weak, but there. "Thank the Lord," she whispered. He was heavy as stone when she tried to move him. It took 3 tries to drag him onto the wagon tarp. She wrapped his shoulders in her shawl and slapped Maple's reins. The mule trudged home as dusk bled through the cottonwoods. By the time she reached her cabin, lantern light glowed pale through the single window. She pulled the wagon to the door and fetched water from the barrel. The man was unconscious, skin cold under the mud. She cleaned him with gentle hands, old habits from tending fevered men in the war years. Under the grime, she found a bullet scar on his shoulder, a white line like a lightning strike. "Who are you?" she murmured. He didn't answer. His chest rose and fell shallowly. She laid him on her late husband's cot near the stove, covered him with a quilt, and sat down beside him. Outside, coyotes yipped. Inside, the fire crackled. Chloe pressed a damp cloth to his forehead. Fear still whispered at the edges of her thoughts. What if the stories were true? What if he woke violent? Yet something about the way he'd looked at her rope, not with anger but disbelief, quieted her fear. She whispered a prayer aloud. "Lord, if I did wrong bringing him here, forgive me. But if you sent me, show me what to do next." Rain began to patter on the roof. She stayed awake till midnight, listening to his breathing steady, the rhythm slow and deep. When she finally slept in the chair, her hand still rested near his arm, as if to make sure he wouldn't vanish back into the dark he'd come from. He woke at dawn. Chloe stirred at the sound of a cough. The man sat upright, blinking around the small cabin like a trapped animal. The quilt slipped from his shoulders. His eyes were gray, cold, but not cruel. "Where am I?" His voice was hoarse. "My cabin," Chloe said softly. "By the San Juan Bend. You were caught in quicksand." He stared at her, confusion flickering. "You pulled me out?" She nodded. "You'd be gone by now if I hadn't." He rubbed his temples. "Reckon I owe you, ma'am." "I didn't do it for owing," she replied. "You needed help." His gaze lingered on her hands, bandaged from the rope burn. Something like shame crossed his face. "Name's Gabe Harrow," he muttered. Chloe froze. The name matched the stories. He noticed her hesitation and sighed. "I know what folks say. Maybe they're half right. But I don't harm women or the helpless." Silence filled the cabin. The fire popped. Finally, Chloe said, "You need food. There's stew on the stove." He didn't argue. He ate slow, careful, as though each bite were a test. When he finished, he set the bowl down and looked at her squarely. "You saved me from the mud. I aim to repay it." "I don't need paying," she said. "I ain't talking silver," he replied. "Let me work for you till your debts are clear. Roof looks near caving and your woodpile's low." Her mouth fell open. "That's not necessary." "I don't take charity," he said quietly. "Let me earn what you did." She hesitated. The last storm had leaked through the rafters. Taxes were due soon. She'd been wondering how to manage. Still, fear whispered. What if he was dangerous after all? She studied him. The way his big hands folded politely in his lap, the roughness in his voice that carried no threat. He looked more tired than mean. "Just until my roof's fixed," she said at last, "and you'll sleep in the shed." He gave a short nod. "Fair." When he rose to go outside, he moved stiffly, like a man twice his age. The morning light caught on his face, revealing lines of pain that no outlaw tale ever mentioned. Chloe watched from the doorway as he began splitting wood without being asked. Every strike of the axe echoed through the valley. She felt something stir in her chest, a strange mix of fear, curiosity, and pity. For the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. The mule brayed softly. The sun climbed higher. Life at the Boone cabin had changed in the space of a single day, and neither of them yet knew that the same river which brought him from the quicksand would soon bring a lawman and a reckoning to their door. Rain kept on through the morning, a soft, steady patter that made the cabin smell of wet wood and smoke. The San Juan ran higher and faster from the night's storm. Chloe woke to the old ache in her shoulders, and the sting of rope burns in her palms. She flexed her fingers, then eased out of the chair. The man in her late husband's cot lay still, breathing slow, the quilt tucked under his broad chin. Mud had dried gray along his beard, cracked like river clay. She stirred the stove and added a pine knot. The flames licked up and sent a glow across the tiny room. One bed, one square table, 2 chairs, a peg for her shawl, shelves with herbs hanging in tied bunches. She ladled yesterday's venison stew into a pot and set it near the heat. Outside, Maple shook rain from her hide, the thump of hooves soft in the sodden yard. The man shifted. His eyes opened, gray and clear now, and found the low rafters, the single window, the cross cut from aspen that hung above the door. He flinched as if he had been struck, then calmed when he saw Chloe. He looked at the bandages on her hands. Shame crossed his face. He tried to sit up and winced. "You're safe," Chloe said, keeping her voice gentle. "You're at my place, by the river bend." He nodded once. "You pulled me out." "I did." "Much obliged." She poured him a tin cup of water and held it while he drank. His hands were too unsteady, and she did not want the cup to spill onto the quilt. He swallowed, then let out a tired breath. "What's your name?" he asked. "Chloe Boone." He seemed to test the name on his tongue, then set his jaw. "Gabe Harrow." She already knew that, but hearing it from his mouth made the room feel smaller. She remembered the wanted poster she had seen months back. The drawing rough but fierce, the hat pulled low, a price printed under the scowling eyes. She did not see that man now. She saw a man worn by mountains and guilt, not rage. "Eat," she said, lifting the spoon to his lips like he was a sick brother. He took a mouthful, coughed once, then managed on his own. The meat was tender. The steam rose in soft curls. Outside, a jay rapped the sill. Rain eased to a whisper. The slow comfort of stew and heat and breathing filled the space between them. "I'll not stay under your roof longer than I ought," Gabe said at last. "Soon as I can stand steady, I'll go." "You nearly drowned," she said. "You'll go when you can walk straight." He stared into the stew like it could tell him what was honorable. "You could have left me," he said. "Most would have." "I wouldn't leave a coyote to that mud," she answered. At the corner of his mouth, the hint of a smile came and went. "That so?" They said little else until the bowl was empty. Chloe wiped his beard with a damp cloth. He bore it without pride. When he tried to rise, the quilt fell to his waist. The old bullet scar on his shoulder showed white and mean against his skin. He swung his legs to the floor and hissed as his feet touched the cold plank. He stood anyway, head nearly brushing the rafters, and took one step. The second step made him sway. Chloe reached out, and he steadied himself with a hand on the chair. "Sit," she said. "Can't," he answered. "My debt starts now." He moved to the door like a stubborn mule. Chloe followed, not arguing, but not leaving him to stumble alone. He pushed the door open. Wet air swept in, clean and sharp. His gaze went first to the mountains shouldering clouds. Then he took in her small yard, the lean woodpile, the roof shingles torn at the eaves, the fence that slouched near the herb beds like a tired old man. He spoke, without turning. "Roof's near done for. Woodpile won't last a week of rain. You got leaky seams at the window. Your mule needs new shoes." Chloe lifted a brow. "You see all that in one breath. Been seeing for a living a long while. You'll not do a thing until you can stand proper." He looked down at his bare feet in her late husband's socks. He bent, picked up his boots from where she had set them to dry, and sniffed at the sour mud. He chuckled low. "Reckon I can stand enough for splitting wood." She fetched his coat and held it while he slid in slow, buttoning with blunt, careful fingers. He took the hat from the peg by the door, her husband's old felt, and paused. "I don't," he began. "Wear it," she said. "You'll work in the rain a spell. He won't mind." He tipped the hat in silent thanks and stepped onto the stoop. The rain was a mist now, fine as breath. Gabe crossed to the chopping block and set a seasoned round on end. He took up the axe. The first swing was clumsy, the second was true, the third found rhythm, and then the yard filled with the clean crack of pine giving way. Wood split and fell in even halves, thudding onto the wet earth. Chloe stood under the porch roof and watched. His movement gained steadiness with the work, like the labor steadied the man. He did not speak, did not look to see if she judged him. He worked because he had said he would. That counted to her. Words were cheap. Work told the truth. An hour passed. She went inside and hung her bandaged hands near the oven door to warm them, then came back with a cup of coffee and a slice of cornbread. Gabe leaned the axe against the block and took both with a nod. He sat on the stoop, boots leaving dark half-moons on the plank. "You got someone to help you when it storms hard?" he asked. "No." She sipped her own coffee. "My man died in January." He did not say sorry the way men often did to cover their own discomfort. He only lowered his gaze and took the silence as a prayer. Wind pushed a few yellow leaves across the yard that had somehow clung to late spring. The river sounded louder after rain, like it had something to say and could not say it. After the coffee, he rose, wiped his mouth on his sleeve, and went to the ladder. He climbed slow but sure. He tested each rung with his weight. On the roof, he crouched, his hands moving along shingles, feeling for soft places. He lifted a row and found rot. He shook his head and called down. "Where you keep your tar and nails?" "In the shed," she answered. "Left side on a shelf. A box marked J." She looked at the roof edge and had to swallow. The last time she had watched a man up there, he had been whistling off-key, a hammer tucked into his belt. She pushed the memory down and the sweetness with it, and went to fetch the box. When she came back out, he was halfway down the ladder to meet her, taking the weight from her hands before she could lift it. He climbed back up with the box held like a child. Chloe went inside and cut strips from an old flour sack to change the wrap on her palms. She tied them with her teeth and a little twine, then packed herbs into small muslin bags for afternoon trade. News of her willow bark and yarrow had traveled up and down the river. People came when they were in pain. They often paid not with coins, but with milk, eggs, or a promise for help at harvest. That too counted. By noon, the rain stopped. A ray of sun cut through and lit the climbing roses on the south wall. The air warmed, and the smell of pine filled the yard. Gabe climbed down with tar on his fingers and a smear across one cheek like a child's war stripe. He did not seem to notice. "Roof won't drown you tonight," he said simply. "Thank you." He nodded once, then tapped his chest. "I meant what I said in there, Miss Boone. Let me stay on. I'll work for you till your debts are clear." She set the herb basket on the table and turned. "My debts?" He touched 2 fingers to the folded paper stuck in a chink of the wall. Her tax notice, the one she had shoved there last week and tried not to see. "You left it where it could be read." Heat climbed her neck. "I ain't used to company." He softened a shade. "I don't mean disrespect. Only, work's honest pay for what you did. I can fell timber, fix fences, mend your roof proper, and help you gather what sells best." She chewed the inside of her lip. Habit warned her to keep men at a distance, Need tugged the other way. And then there was the other matter, the name he carried, the wanted talk, the law that never forgot a face once it locked in the mind. "Just until the roof and woodpile are right," she said at last, "and you'll sleep in the shed." "Fair measure," he answered, the same words as before, but now edged with relief. They ate midday biscuits dipped in molasses. Afterward, Chloe pulled on her shawl and checked the herb bag slung over her shoulder. "I need to go into town," she said. "Sell what I gathered. Buy flour and salt. I've a list." Gabe turned his head toward the faint line of a road that wound through cottonwoods and into the small cluster of buildings called a town. "You want me along?" She measured him. "You can steer the wagon if you can keep to your feet." He set the hat on his head again. "I can keep." They hitched Maple to the wagon. The road was rutted but firming as the sun burned wet clay into a crust. Wild geese croaked from the river as they drew even with the ford. A pair of girls in calico dresses waved from a gate, then pulled their hands back when they saw the man beside Chloe. Gabe kept his eyes on the road. His hands were steady on the lines. The town came into view like a row of teeth. White boards, straight fronts, rough between. A sign creaked above the mercantile. Dodson and Sons. The blacksmith's hammer rang, steady and strong. Two men leaned on a hitch rail, talking. When they saw Gabe, their bodies shifted, not toward welcome, but toward warning. Chloe felt her spine stiffen. She had walked into rooms under eyes before. This felt the same, only larger. They stopped by the telegraph office first. Chloe traded a small bundle of willow bark to the operator's wife for a spool of thread and a wedge of cheese. The woman looked at Gabe and moved the cheese into Chloe's hands with a tiny nod, the way one person offers respect when others will not. "You be careful," she whispered. "Always am," Chloe said. At the mercantile, it was worse. Mr. Dodson's oldest son stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled, hair slicked flat. He looked from Chloe to Gabe and back again. "We don't sell to drifters," he announced, chin high. "I ain't a drifter," Chloe answered, steady and polite. "I'm a widow who pays her bills." "You're keeping bad company." "I keep to my own business," she said. She laid her list on the counter. "Flour, salt, lamp oil, nails if you've got them at a price I can meet." The young man's jaw worked. He looked toward the storeroom, where his father's voice murmured with a customer. His eyes flicked back to Gabe, and something like fear crept into his bluster. Gabe stayed still, hands easy at his sides, gaze lowered. He could have filled the room with his presence. Instead, he made himself smaller, as men used to hard country learn to do when a thing can go bad quick. Finally, the boy fetched the goods and slammed them down one by one. "Cash only," he said. Chloe counted out coins from a cloth purse. The pile looked thin, without her husband's calloused fingers putting down the rest. She paid anyway. Dodson scrawled a mark on paper and pushed the parcel toward her. As she gathered the bundle, a rustle moved at the door. Two farm wives stepped in, their talk stalling. One whispered, "That's him," with a slice of breath. The other lifted her child and hugged him close. Gabe nodded to Chloe toward the street. "I'll load," he said. He carried the parcel with care, like a thing that belonged to a life he had not known for a long while. On the porch, the blacksmith's hammer paused. "Harrow," someone said from across the street, not loud but sharp. The name struck the air. Gabe did not look. Back in the wagon, Chloe set the parcels between her boots and folded her hands tight. The road out of town felt longer than the road in. She watched the storefronts slide past, each window a small mirror of faces drawn tight with talk. The bell over the church door rang from a gust, a hollow, lovely sound that made her throat ache. "Are you truly the man they say?" she asked at last, not in doubt, but as a woman who wanted plain answers. Gabe kept the lines loose. "They say a lot." "Did you kill 3 men on Broken Knife Ridge?" He took a breath and let it out slow. "I killed 2 that night. The 3rd lived, though he went meaner after, and I reckon he told it his way. They had a child cornered, a Ute girl. The men wore railroad coats and drank vicious. I told them to move on. They didn't. I did what I did and left before the law could make it something else." Chloe's hands loosened their grip on her skirt. "Where's the girl now?" "With her aunt, last I knew." His voice roughened. "Couldn't save her uncle." Silence came again, but it was a different kind, the kind that grows when truth enters a room and sits down. They reached home by late afternoon. The sun broke fully from the clouds and laid gold over the river. Gabe lifted the sack of flour as if it weighed nothing, which told Chloe his strength was returning, though the set of his mouth said he was careful not to show off. They stored the goods. She brewed coffee. He washed tar from his hands in a basin, scrubbing hard. He stared at the black water, then tossed it around the stump where he had split wood. "Thank you for walking brave through town," he said. "You shouldn't have to pay a price for me." "Kindness isn't a price," she answered. He opened his mouth, shut it, then nodded. "Still, I'll keep to the shed. I don't want trouble on your doorstep." "Trouble already knocked," she said. I answered polite and shut the door. He snorted a small laugh. "You got iron to you, Miss Boone?" "Roof and woodpile first," she replied, not smiling but willing to let a small warmth sit between them. "Tomorrow I'll sort seeds for the herb beds. You can turn the soil where it needs it." He looked toward the river and the far slopes. "I'll be up before sun." His gaze shifted to her bandages. "Let me tend those hands proper." "I can manage. Let me try." He spoke it soft, not as a man giving orders, but as one asking to give back. She hesitated, then went to the table. He set the lamp closer, lit it, and trimmed the wick. He unwound the old cloth wraps, careful as a man diffusing a trap. The rope burns were angry red and edged with torn skin. He winced as if the pain were his. He washed them with warm water, dabbed them dry with a clean scrap, then reached for her little brown jar of salve without her needing to tell him. The mint and pine smell rose sweet and sharp. He worked the salve in with light touches, laid fresh cloth, and tied neat knots with a hunter's patience. "Better," he said. "Much." He placed her hands gently on the table as if laying down a fragile thing in a church. Then he stood, tipped his hat, and stepped toward the door. "I said I'd repay," he reminded her, half to himself. "You already started," she said. He went out into the fading day and crossed to the shed. The door creaked. A moment later she heard him move inside, the small sounds of a man making a place for his body on hay and old blankets, the hush that follows when there is nothing left to arrange but sleep. Chloe blew out the lamp and stood in the soft dark. The river muttered beyond the cottonwoods. A coyote called from the far bank and got an answer. She pressed her newly bound hands together and bowed her head. "Lord," she whispered, "help me keep my heart steady. Help me see true." The wind that slipped through the chinks brought the faintest hint of snow, as if winter kept one finger on the door, though spring had claimed the room. She banked the stove and drew the quilt to her shoulders. When she lay down, sleep came fast and deep. The day had been long and heavy, but there was a curious lightness under it, like a bridge beginning where yesterday there had only been water. Morning would bring work. The roof would still need mending. The woodpile would edge toward strong. The town would still talk. The law might stir. But for one night, the cabin held two kinds of quiet. One for grief that was finally thinning, and one for the new thing, unnamed, that had set its roots in the wet earth and would not be pulled up easy. Dawn tried the sky with a pink brush. Chloe rose to the soft cluck of maple at the gate and the thud of an axe from the yard. Gabe was already splitting kindling, smoke from the shed pipe curling pale as breath. He had washed his face and beard in cold water and looked more like a man and less like a story told at the mercantile. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she answered. The word felt simple and good. She set coffee to boil. He stacked wood. The day began with plain tasks and the firm truth of them. Hands to work, feet to stand, hearts to learn. The river ran on. The mountains kept their counsel. And the sound of the axe, steady and sure, laid a beat beneath the small song Chloe hummed as she measured beans and counted blessings, one by one. Morning sunlight broke through the thin mist along the river, soft and gold like butter melting over bread. The air smelled of pine and wet soil. Chloe Boone stepped out onto the porch, holding a tin cup of coffee between her hands, her bandaged palms still tender. She breathed deep, trying to steady the mix of feelings that had settled in her since the stranger arrived. A strange peace wrapped around a small kernel of fear. The man was already awake. Gabe Harrow stood near the shed, sharpening his axe with patient, rhythmic strokes. Each scrape of steel on stone carried a surety that came only from long practice. His coat hung open, his shirt still damp from washing at the river. He looked like a man rebuilding himself one breath at a time. "Morning," Chloe called. He lifted his head and gave a small nod. "Morning, ma'am. Firewood's stacked. Roof'll hold if another storm rolls through." She tried to sound light. "You work faster than rain can fall." "Old habit," he said. "A man gets used to working when there's light enough to see." He went back to sharpening, the rasp steady and low. She watched him a moment longer before turning to the stove inside. Breakfast was oatmeal with honey and a slice of salt pork. When she carried the bowls out, he straightened as if he wasn't sure he had the right to sit. "Eat," she said. "You'll need it." They sat on the porch steps. The sound of the river joined the sparrows in the eaves. When he finished eating, he folded his hands and looked out toward the mountains. "You said the roof and woodpile were payment enough. But you've got other troubles, don't you?" She frowned. "Troubles?" "The paper nailed by your stove. I didn't mean to pry. Wind flipped it open when I was patching leaks." Chloe's stomach tightened. The county notice, her late husband's taxes, had been hanging there for weeks, taunting her. "That's between me and the clerk," she said. "I know that look," Gabe said softly. "Ain't the first time a good person's been cornered by a piece of paper." She stood, ready to end the talk, but he kept his seat. "Let me help you work off that debt," he continued. "Not with talk, real work. I can fix fence, mend tack, haul timber. You won't owe me a thing after." She hesitated. The man spoke with no edge, only quiet conviction. Still, the stories whispered in her mind. Butcher of Broken Knife Ridge, killer of men. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why offer so much?" He met her eyes. "Because a woman risked her life for a man nobody else would have saved. Because I need to put my hands to something decent before I leave this world." The words hung in the morning air, heavy and plain. Chloe found herself nodding before she realized it. "All right, one season. You help until the ground freezes." "That'll do," he said, and rose. "I'll start with your fence before noon." By late morning, Gabe was knee-deep in the corral, hammering new rails in place. Chloe worked nearby, drying willow bark and tending her herb beds. The day moved with quiet rhythm, her humming mixing with the thud of his hammer. When the noon whistle blew from the sawmill downriver, Gabe straightened his back and looked across the field. "How far's town?" "4 miles, she said. "Why?" "Need nails and fresh tar. Roof'll need more before the season turns." She hesitated, remembering how the townsfolk had looked at them the day before. "You'd best let me go alone." He nodded slowly. "Fair. But I'll walk you to the bend. Roads ain't kind to women traveling alone." She agreed, though part of her bristled. Yet, as they set out, the quiet comfort of another presence beside her was a relief she hadn't expected. They passed a stretch of cottonwoods and paused near the river ford. The water sparkled in the sun. "Strange," Chloe said softly, "how a river can both save a man and try to take him in the same day." Gabe's jaw tightened. "Reckon that's true for most things God made." They shared a look that lingered too long. Then she cleared her throat. "I'll be back. Before supper." He tipped his hat. "I'll keep a fire going." That afternoon, Chloe returned with flour, lamp oil, and nails tied in a sack. The store clerk had refused to speak more than 2 words to her, and she'd felt every stare in town. But she came home to the sight of Gabe building a new fence line, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel entirely alone in her burden. He worked until dusk. When he finally set down the hammer, his shoulders sagged with exhaustion. Chloe met him on the porch with a tin plate of stew. "Thank you," she said simply. He looked at her for a long moment before taking the plate. "You keep saying that. Maybe you ain't used to folks meaning what they do." She smiled faintly. "And you? You mean to stay?" "For now." As the sun slipped behind the ridge, Chloe felt something she hadn't in a long time. Peace. She didn't yet trust him fully, but the cabin felt warmer, steadier, as if some old sorrow had been shouldered by another set of hands. That night, as she blew out the lamp, she caught herself whispering, "Thank you, Lord, for sending help I never thought would come." By the next week, the hills were greening with new grass, and the air smelled of warm earth. Chloe worked in her herb beds while Gabe mended a section of the corral, humming low under his breath. Life had found its rhythm again. Morning chores, quiet meals, the steady comfort of another soul nearby. For the first time since her husband's passing, the house felt like a home instead of a lonely echo. But peace on the frontier never lasted long. That Thursday, as the sun dipped low behind the ridge, a cloud of dust rose on the trail to town. Chloe shaded her eyes. A rider was coming fast, the glint of a badge flashing in the light. Gabe's hammer froze mid-swing. "Marshal," he muttered, voice flat. Chloe's breath caught. "You sure?" "Only one man rides with that seat, back straight, hat brim low." The rider slowed as he reached the cabin, his chestnut horse lathered and blowing hard. He swung down, boots crunching the gravel. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat to Chloe before fixing his gaze on Gabe. "And you, Harrow?" Gabe's shoulders tensed, but he didn't move for the axe. "Marshal Corman." The 2 men regarded each other like wolves testing distance. Corman's face was weathered and square, his gray mustache trimmed neat. The star on his vest shone bright against the dust. "I'll not pretend surprise," the marshal said. "Been on your trail near a year." "I didn't run," Gabe said. "I walked away." "From a killing." Chloe stepped between them, her voice steady, though her knees shook. "Marshal, he's done no harm here. He's been working honest." Corman glanced at her, respectful but unmoved. "Ma'am, I'm sure you mean well, but I'm sworn to the law." He reached into his coat and drew out a folded notice. The paper, creased from travel. "Wanted for the murder of a man named Royce Tanner, railroad surveyor. Witnesses place Harrow at the scene." That man wasn't innocent, Gabe said quietly. Law doesn't see shades, Harrow, only black and white. And God? Gabe asked. The marshal's eyes flickered, but he didn't answer. Chloe's heart pounded. She saw no hatred in Gabe's face, only a heavy weariness, the look of someone who'd already stood trial in his own soul. Marshal, please, she said. Let him explain. Corman sighed. I don't make judgments, I just bring men in. He looked toward the hills, then back. You've got until morning. I'll camp by the ford. If he's gone come dawn, I'll take that as his choice. He tipped his hat again and rode off, leaving dust and silence in his wake. Gabe turned back to his workbench, though his hands trembled. Chloe followed him. Tell me the truth, she said. I told you already, he said. 3 men cornered a Ute child near the old mining camp. They were drunk, laughing about collecting a bounty for moving families off railroad land. I told them to let her be. And? They didn't. I did what a man ought to do. Chloe felt the words sink into her chest. The story sounded plain, but the cost in his eyes said more than words could. You saved her? I reckon, but the one that lived told it different. She sat down hard on the bench. And now they're coming for you. He nodded. I could ride, but then you'd pay for hiding me. Chloe's throat tightened. You don't strike me as the kind who runs. Not anymore. The lamplight threw their shadows along against the wall. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the river murmured its steady, endless song. At last, Chloe said, You'll stay here tonight. If he wants to take you, he'll have to walk through me first. Gabe looked at her, startled. You'd do that? She nodded. You saved my roof. Maybe it's time I saved yours. That night, rain swept down from the mountains again. Chloe couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the stormlight flash across the river. Gabe sat on the porch under the overhang, hat pulled low, the faint glow of his pipe ember pulsing like a heartbeat. Near midnight, he spoke softly through the door. You should rest. So should you, she said. I done my resting. Years of it. You can't outrun ghosts, Miss Boone. They walk beside you till you make peace. Then make it, she said. He chuckled low. You got preacher words when you're angry. I've got truth, she said, and turned back to the window. Thunder rolled, long and deep. By dawn, the rain had stopped. Marshal Corman waited by the ford, his horse drinking from the shallows. Gabe walked down the slope slow and steady, coat buttoned, hat in place. Chloe followed several paces behind, holding her shawl tight. Corman looked up. You made your choice then? I ain't running, Gabe said, but I'll not let a railroad lie bury the truth either. The marshal studied him, then nodded once. We'll see what truth remains when we reach Durango. Chloe stepped forward. Marshal, please. He's not what they say. Then pray you're right, ma'am, Corman said. He pulled the reins, and the horses started up the trail. Gabe turned once, just once, to meet Chloe's eyes. She lifted a trembling hand. I'll find a way, she whispered. He gave a faint nod before the trees swallowed him from view. The yard felt emptier than winter. But in her heart, Chloe knew this wasn't an ending. It was the turning point of everything. The next days stretched long and quiet. Without the marshal's shadow nearby, the valley seemed to breathe again, though Chloe's heart could not settle. She rose before dawn each morning, praying by the stove's faint glow. Gabe worked from sunup to sundown, fixing the roofline, checking fences, and mending tools with wordless focus. He kept his distance more than before. Polite, careful, and tired, like a man holding back a storm inside him. By the fourth evening, the rhythm of labor gave way to stillness. The rain had returned, soft, silver, and steady. Chloe stood at the window, watching the drops run down the glass. Gabe was on the roof, his hammer still rising and falling against the wind. "Come down," she called. "You'll break your neck in that rain." He climbed down, boots slick with mud. His shirt clung to him, soaked through, his hair plastered to his forehead. He carried himself like a soldier reporting for duty. "You don't stop, do you?" she said. He smiled faintly. "A roof don't wait for good weather." She fetched a towel, tossed it his way. "You'll catch a chill if you don't dry off." He took it, but didn't move. "You ever ask why a man works so hard when he could just move on?" Chloe looked up. "You owe nobody here." "That's where you're wrong." He set the towel aside and leaned on the doorway. "When you hauled me from that mud, you gave me something I hadn't had since before the war. Mercy. I don't take that lightly." She studied him in the lamplight. His face looked older, but his eyes, gray as river stones, held something she hadn't seen before. Not fear, not guilt, maybe hope, faint and trembling. "What did you do before the mountains?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, then spoke as the rain beat harder on the roof. "Army Scout, Colorado Territory, hired to find passes, mark trails. It started honest, ended with too much blood. We'd been told to clear out villages that refused to move east. I followed orders until one night we rode into a camp that wasn't armed. Women, children. The major said burn it anyway." Chloe's hand went to her mouth. "I threw down my rifle," he said. "I tried to pull one boy out before the tents. Caught. I did. But not his mother. They court-martialed me for insubordination. I walked away instead." He fell silent. The stove ticked softly. The only sound was the rain. "I never stopped hearing them cry," he said at last. "That's why I stayed out in those hills. Easier to face wind than people." Chloe moved closer, her voice soft. "And the men you killed by Broken Knife Ridge?" His jaw worked. "They were doing the same thing, taking what didn't belong to them. A Ute girl. She couldn't have been 10. I told them to stop. They laughed. I didn't wait for permission." He looked down at his hands, big, scarred, trembling now. "Law calls it murder. I call it a man remembering too late what's right." Chloe swallowed hard. "And the girl?" "She lived. Last I heard, she was with her aunt near the Animus. I carried that child to their camp myself." She reached for the kettle, though her hands shook. "Seems to me, law ain't always the same as justice." He gave a bitter laugh. "Marshal Corman wouldn't agree." "Maybe not," she said. "But I've seen liars wear badges and saints wear scars." That broke something in him. He looked away, blinking against tears he didn't want her to see. She placed a mug of coffee in his hands. "Drink that before you freeze." He nodded, voice rough. "You've got more faith than most preachers." "I don't have faith in men," she said, "only in what God can still make of them." They sat in silence for a while, the firelight flickering over their faces. Outside, thunder rolled across the ridge, deep and distant. Finally, Gabe spoke again. "When the marshal comes back, and he will, I won't let you get caught in it. If I have to ride out, I'll go quiet." Chloe's head lifted sharply. "You'll do no such thing." He frowned. "Why not?" "Because running means guilt," she said. "And you've paid enough for what you did right. I won't stand by and let truth die just because men don't want to hear it." He looked at her as if she'd just spoken a language he'd forgotten. "You'd fight for me?" "I'd fight for what's fair," she said simply. "That includes you." He swallowed hard. "You're a stubborn woman." "I've been called worse." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "You remind me of my sister. She'd swing a skillet at any man who talked over her. Smart woman, Chloe said, smiling back. For the first time since the storm that brought him to her door, laughter, soft, honest, filled the cabin. It startled them both. When the laughter faded, she stood and went to the window. The rain had stopped. The river glistened under the moon, full and alive. You best get some rest, she said. Tomorrow we'll check the west fence. Cattle have been pushing through again. He rose, setting the mug down. Miss Boone, thank you for listening. She nodded, voice gentle. Thank you for telling me. He hesitated at the doorway to the shed, hat in hand. You think a man like me could ever earn peace? She met his gaze steadily. Peace isn't earned, she said. It's given when you stop fighting the one who wants to give it. He looked away, then smiled faintly. I'll think on that. When he was gone, Chloe stood by the window, watching his silhouette move toward the shed. The wind carried a clean scent of rain and pine, and the stars broke through the clouds. She closed her eyes and whispered, Lord, you've brought me a broken man. Maybe that's so you can mend us both. The valley quieted into early summer, green and sweet-smelling after the rains. Days grew longer, and the river sparkled like hammered silver beneath the sun. Gabe rose before dawn, his silhouette cutting through the pale light as he split wood, mended harness, and checked fence lines. Chloe, from the kitchen window, often caught herself watching him. He worked without complaint, without hurry, and somehow filled the silence that once pressed too heavy on her heart. By mid-morning, the cabin smelled of dried sage and boiling soap. Chloe knelt beside the hearth, stirring the pot with a wooden stick. If we keep this pace, I'll have enough to trade by month's end, she said when Gabe stepped in, carrying a pail of water. He set it down gently. You'll have more than enough if you price fair. She smiled faintly. Fair's not how the town buys from widows. He frowned. Then we'll make 'em see reason. We, she teased. He shrugged. Reckon you saved my life. That makes your fight mine, too. The warmth that rose in her chest had little to do with the fire. She stirred the pot again, pretending not to notice her hands trembling slightly. That afternoon, a knock came at the door. When Chloe opened it, a boy of about 10 stood on the porch, pale and tear-streaked, holding his arm close to his chest. Miss Boone, he sniffled, Ma says you can fix bones. It was Tommy Ryder, one of her neighbor's sons. His forearm was swollen and bent wrong. Gabe crouched low beside him, gentle despite his size. Fell from a tree? Tommy nodded, biting his lip. Chloe ushered him in, laid him on her table, and fetched willow bark and linen. Hold him steady, she told Gabe. He obeyed without question. As she worked, he spoke softly to the boy, keeping him calm. When the bone snapped back into place, Tommy yelped but didn't fight. Gabe's grip was sure and steady as stone. There, Chloe said, binding the arm. You'll heal strong. Tommy sniffled. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Gabe tousled his hair. Brave kid. When the boy left, Chloe exhaled, shaking her sore hands. Gabe reached for her gently. You did good. You kept him still. That was the hardest part. He smiled faintly. We make a fine team. As evening fell, the sky turned violet. The two ate, supper by the fire, stew again, with fresh bread this time. Chloe found herself speaking more freely. I used to think work was the only way to quiet grief, she said, but sometimes quiet feels worse. Gabe nodded slowly. Lonely's heavier than tired, that's certain. You know that well? He poked at the fire. Lived years with only my own tracks for company. Thought I wanted that. Turns out a man can talk to wind only so long before he starts wishing for a voice to answer back. She looked into the firelight, her eyes soft. You've got one now. He turned toward her. Maybe that's what scares me most. She didn't speak for a moment. The air between them grew still. Outside, the coyotes called from the ridge, their cries echoing through the dark. I'll heat water, she said finally, standing. You've earned a wash after all that fence work. He chuckled low. Don't spoil me, Miss Boone. Just keeping a promise, she said. When she looked back, he was still watching her, the firelight catching his gray eyes. It struck her then, how this man, feared by so many, had learned tenderness from hardship. That night, long after Gabe retired to the shed, Chloe lingered by the window. The cabin glowed warm behind her, a haven against the wild world. She whispered a prayer, thankful for peace and fearful of how much she'd begun to want it. The day broke bright and mild, the kind of early summer morning that promised no storms, only clear skies and warm winds from the canyon. Chloe swept the porch while Gabe split the last of the oak logs. He worked bare-armed, steady, each swing a clean arc that echoed off the hills. She watched him for a moment, then laughed quietly. If you keep that up, there won't be a tree left in San Juan. He grinned without looking up. Then we'll have room for your herbs. She shook her head, smiling. The gentle rhythm of their days had settled into something comfortable, almost homelike. But a thought kept tugging at her. How long could peace last when rumor and suspicion still hovered over Gabe's name? That afternoon, while hanging herbs to dry, she turned to him. Let's have company on Sunday. Neighbors, maybe Reverend Latham and his wife. It's time folks see you as I do. Gabe's brows rose. You sure that's wise? Wise or not, she said. It's decent. He hesitated, then nodded. I'll scrub up. Sunday came golden and bright. Gabe polished the table till it gleamed, gathered wildflowers for the center, and even shaved, his beard trimmed neat. Chloe cooked venison stew, biscuits, and apple preserves saved from last fall. When the first wagon creaked into the yard, she caught her breath. Tommy Ryder's family came first, then the blacksmith's wife with a pie, and finally Reverend Latham smiling beneath his wide-brimmed hat. They all looked uneasy when they saw Gabe, but Chloe met them with such warmth that the tension thinned like fog in sunlight. Come in, friends, she said. There's room for every soul at this table. Inside, lamplight and laughter soon filled the small cabin. Gabe kept to the corner at first, listening more than speaking, but when the Reverend began a hymn, softly and tenderly, Gabe joined in. His deep, rough baritone surprised everyone, even himself. The notes carried across the room like a prayer wrestled from stone. When the song ended, silence held for a breath. Then Mrs. Ryder dabbed her eyes. Mercy, she whispered. That voice could shake heaven. Chloe smiled, her heart full. For a moment she saw the burden lift from Gabe's shoulders. He looked lighter, almost free. After supper, children played outside, while grown folk shared stories by the fire. Reverend Latham spoke softly to Gabe about forgiveness, not as duty, but as release. Gabe listened, nodding, his face unreadable. When the last wagon rolled away under a sky heavy with stars, Chloe and Gabe stood on the porch. Crickets sang from the grass. You see, she said gently. They're not so different once they know the man, not the stories. He watched the lantern lights disappear down the trail. It was a good night, he said. Haven't sung that hymn since my sister's wedding. Then it was time, she said. He looked at her, eyes warm. You've got a way of dragging men from the mud, Miss Boone, one way or another. She laughed softly. Maybe that's my calling. Later, as the fire dimmed, Chloe knelt by the window, whispering thanks. The night felt holy in its stillness. Outside, Gabe hummed the hymn again, his voice low but sure, like a promise carried on the wind. The week after the Sunday supper came with clear skies and promise. The neighbors who had once whispered now waved when they passed Chloe's place. Even Reverend Latham stopped by, leaving a Bible verse on a scrap of paper tucked under a jar of apple preserves. Mercy rejoiceth against judgment. Gabe took to whistling while he worked, and Chloe found herself humming along from the garden. Peace had finally taken root, but the frontier had a way of testing any peace it found. That morning, the post-rider's horn echoed down the valley. Chloe wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out to meet him. "Letter for a Miss Boone," he called, handing her a folded telegram sealed in dust and grease. She thanked him, heart thumping fast. Few folks wrote her anymore. She opened it on the porch, her eyes moving over the brief lines. Her stomach turned cold. Land survey adjusted by railroad company. Claim disputed. Property under review. Report to Durango for clarification before harvest. She stared at the words. Her husband's land, the little cabin, the herb patch, the life she'd built, was now being claimed by the railroad. Gabe came from the shed, wiping his hands on a rag. "Bad news?" She passed him the paper silently. He'll read it once, twice, then folded it carefully. "This is what they do," he said bitterly. "They shift the lines till no poor soul's got a place left to stand." Chloe felt weak. "But the deed's clear, filed after my husband's death. I have the paper." "Doesn't matter. Their lawyers will say the boundary was drawn wrong." He looked off toward the mountains. "Durango office handles all land disputes. If we ride there, we might still stop it." "We?" she asked. He nodded. "You'll need someone who's dealt with those devils before. I've seen their tricks." They left before dawn the next day. Chloe packed bread, dried meat, and herbs. Gabe saddled Maple and his bay mare. The ride to Durango was long and slow, 40 miles of winding trail through red rock and pine. They camped by the river at dusk. Firelight painted gold across Gabe's face as he studied the telegram. "There's one man behind this," he said. "Samuel Drayton, railroad agent. Same name that signed orders at Broken Knife." Chloe's heart sank. "The same?" "The very one. He's moved up since. Makes his money stealing land from the dead and the weak." She stared into the flames. "And you think he's after me now?" "I think he's after whatever land's worth something," Gabe said grimly. "But if he finds out I'm alive, he'll call the marshal faster than a wolf smells blood." They slept in shifts, the night wind sharp off the canyon walls. Chloe prayed silently for courage. Durango appeared 2 days later, sprawling and loud, a town of timber and smoke. Wagons rattled down Main Street, and the clang of the blacksmith's hammer echoed between buildings. Gabe kept his hat low. At the land office, a clerk in a bow tie glanced up lazily when Chloe handed him her deed and telegram. "Boone, you say? Cabin on San Juan, parcel 15? Well, ma'am, looks like that line's been redrawn. Belongs to the railroad now." "That land's mine," she said firmly. "Filed proper and paid every tax due." The clerk shrugged. "Talk to the company agent. Name's Drayton." Gabe's jaw clenched. "I'll talk to him." Chloe gripped his sleeve. "Not yet," she whispered. "Not till we know what we're walking into." They waited an hour in the crowded hall. When Drayton finally appeared, he was polished as a banker. Fine coat, silver-tipped cane, hair slick as oil. His eyes skimmed Chloe, then froze on Gabe. "Well, well," he drawled. "The ghost of Broken Knife Ridge walks again." The room went still. "You've no business here, Harrow," Drayton said smoothly. "You're a wanted man." Unless... He leaned in, smirking. You'd care to disappear again, for her sake. Chloe's face flushed hot. You'll not threaten me, sir. Not a threat, ma'am, Drayton said. Just the way of things. The law favors progress. Folks like you... He gestured dismissively. Get left. Behind. Gabe stepped forward, his voice low and deadly calm. You lay one finger on her name and you'll regret it. Drayton's smirk faltered for a heartbeat. Then he turned. Marshal Corman's still in town. I imagine he'd be mighty glad to see you. Chloe caught Gabe's arm. We're leaving. They stepped out into the dusty street, hearts pounding. Gabe looked skyward, jaw tight. He means to take everything. Your land, your name, and my freedom. She drew a steadying breath. Then we fight the only way left, with truth. He frowned. Truth doesn't always matter in a world bought and sold. Maybe not, she said, but it matters to God, and that's enough for me. That night at the small inn, they spread papers across the bed. The deed, the telegram, her husband's receipts. Gabe unfolded a worn map from his coat pocket. See this mark here? He pointed to a faded red line drawn years ago. That's the treaty boundary. If it's still valid, then your land falls under the protection of Ute Nation territory, land that can't legally be sold. Chloe leaned closer, hope flickering. Can we prove it? Gabe nodded slowly. If the right eyes see it, maybe. He folded the map carefully and placed it inside his Bible. We'll ride home tomorrow. I've got a feeling the fight's coming to us now. The wind carried dust that morning, dry and sharp off the ridge. Chloe stepped onto the porch, eyes scanning the trail like she'd been doing every sunrise since Durango. The telegram and the railroad man's smirk still burned in her mind. Gabe was already saddling the horses, his face set hard with purpose. They'd made it home the night before, tired but determined. The cabin looked smaller after the wide Durango streets, but it felt safe, holy ground worth fighting for. Chloe went to fetch water, only to see a lone rider cresting the hill. His badge glinted in the sun. Marshal Corman, Gabe said quietly, pulling his hat low. Chloe's pulse jumped. He's early. Or Drayton sent him fast, Gabe muttered. The marshal dismounted at the gate, dust puffing up around his boots. Morning, he said flatly. You made quite a stir in Durango, Harrow. Word is the railroad's missing a map, and a land agent's temper. Chloe stepped forward, voice steady. He threatened me, Marshal. Said the company owned my home. Corman's eyes flicked to her, then back to Gabe. And now the company's saying this man assaulted their representative. Gabe crossed his arms. If words count as assault, I'm guilty. The marshal sighed. You never make my job easy. He unpinned a folded paper from his vest pocket. By order of the territorial court, you're under arrest for obstruction and previous charges relating to Broken Knife Ridge. Chloe's hands balled into fists. Marshal, you know this isn't right! Corman's face softened a fraction. I'm bound by the warrant, ma'am, but I'll not shackle him if he comes peaceably. Gabe's gaze met Chloe's. He nodded once. Ain't worth running. He turned to the marshal. You've got my word. I'll come quiet. Corman looked surprised, then motioned toward his horse. We ride to Durango by midday. As Gabe stepped past, Chloe caught his sleeve. I'll fix this, I swear it. His voice was low. Don't waste your prayers on me. Her eyes shone. I'm not wasting them. I'm fighting with them. He gave a faint, weary smile, then mounted and rode off beside the marshal. The sound of hooves faded, leaving only wind and the creak of the gate. That evening, the sky turned red with dust. Chloe sat by the fire, Gabe's Bible open in her lap. The old folded map slipped free and landed on the floorboards. She picked it up, tracing the red boundary line with her finger. Proof, she thought. If only someone would listen. She wrapped the map in oilcloth and packed a small satchel. The nearest telegraph office was 20 miles east. If she could send word to Reverend Latham in Durango, maybe he could speak on Gabe's behalf. By lantern light, she wrote her message. To Reverend Henry Latham, Durango. Gabe Harrow arrested unjustly. Railroad forging claims. Need witness for map verification. I will ride at dawn. Chloe Boone. She sealed it and set it on the table, ready for the morning. Outside, thunder grumbled over the mountains, the kind that promised a hard ride ahead. Chloe stared out into the dark, whispering, Lord, give me the strength to keep my word. Dawn came pale and cold, the kind of morning when even the birds stayed quiet. Chloe Boone cinched her saddle straps and packed a single satchel. Bread, jerky, the wrapped map, and her husband's Bible. The valley mist clung low over the river as she mounted Maple and whispered, Let's go, girl. We've a man to save. The first miles were easy, soft earth still damp from night rain, but the trail climbed fast, twisting through pine forest where fog hung thick. Chloe rode steady, every hoofbeat drumming her vow. He saved my home. I'll save his name. By midday, clouds gathered again. She stopped only once to water the mule and read the telegram one last time. Reverend Latham's reply waited at the small post shack near the canyon pass. Ride on! I'll meet you in Durango. Bring the map. Faith will stand where law fails. Chloe folded it carefully. Faith will stand, she murmured, and nudged Maple onward. The road turned rough near Bear Creek. Fallen trees forced her to lead the mule on foot. The air grew colder, the smell of iron and rain mixing with pine. A thunderclap cracked overhead, and the sky opened up, sheets of rain drenching the earth. She pressed forward, soaked but unbroken. I won't let him hang for mercy, she whispered. By nightfall, she reached the old stage station halfway to town. It was long, abandoned, walls leaning, roof sagging. She built a small fire inside and spread her damp shawl near the embers. The storm battered the door, wind whistling through the cracks. She prayed aloud, voice shaking but sure. Lord, you gave me the strength to pull him from that mud. Give me strength to pull him from this too. Outside, thunder rolled like cannon fire. Inside, Chloe dried the map, smoothing it flat beside the firelight. The faint red line gleamed through the soot. A boundary older than the railroad, older than any deed. This is the truth, she thought, and truth can't drown. She didn't sleep much. Each time the wind howled, she thought she heard hoofbeats, men hunting her, perhaps Drayton's riders. But dawn came quietly, the storm spent. The world glistened new and clean. By noon, she crested the last ridge overlooking Durango. Smoke from the rail yard hung low, and the faint clang of hammers reached her ears. The courthouse stood tall at the center, its flag limp in the still air. She swallowed hard. One step at a time, she told herself. She rode straight to Reverend Latham's parsonage on the east side of town. He met her at the gate, his old eyes kind but worried. You came alone? I couldn't wait, she said, swinging down. He's locked up already. He took the map from her hands and studied it. If this holds true, child, it's more than proof, it's justice. I need the court to see it, she said. He nodded. Then we'll see it done, come what may. Together they walked toward the courthouse, the world suddenly feeling larger, louder, and more dangerous than the valley she'd left that morning. But in her chest, a strange calm grew, like the kind that comes when fear finally breaks into faith. Durango's courthouse loomed gray and solemn against the afternoon sun. Chloe Boone stood at the bottom of its steps, dust clinging to her skirts, hands trembling around the folded map. Reverend Latham walked beside her, a calm shadow of reassurance. Inside, the air was close, thick with murmurs, the scrape of chairs and the faint scent of tobacco and ink. Gabe Harrow sat at the defense table, unshackled but flanked by deputies. He looked worn but unbroken. When his eyes met Chloe's across the room, something steady passed between them. An unspoken promise that neither would bend to lies. Marshal Corman stood near the witness stand, hat in hand. Samuel Drayton sat at the front with the railroad's attorney, smug and polished as ever. The judge, a heavy man with a beard like winter frost, rapped his gavel. Court is now in session. Case of the Territory versus Gabriel Harrow. Drayton rose smoothly. Your Honor, the accused is a known fugitive, guilty of murder and obstruction of federal enterprise. The woman beside him, Miss Boone, has been unlawfully occupying land owned by the railroad under revised survey law. Chloe's stomach twisted. Reverend Latham touched her shoulder gently. Truth, child. Speak truth, and let it stand. When the judge called her forward, she stepped up, clutching the oilcloth-wrapped map. I have proof, she said, voice trembling at first, then growing firm. Proof that the land in question, mine, was never railroad property at all. The courtroom buzzed. Drayton's smile faltered. Your Honor, that woman's testimony. Let her speak, the judge said. Chloe laid the map on the table. This was drawn and signed before the railroad came through. My husband filed our claim according to this boundary. And this man, she nodded toward Gabe, carried it in his Bible for years, because he knew the line also protected Ute territory under treaty. The railroad survey is false. Drayton's face turned red. Preposterous. That document is worthless. Before the judge could respond, the courtroom doors opened. An elderly woman in a deerskin shawl entered, walking slow but proud. Chloe recognized her instantly. Nara 10 Crows, the Ute elder Gabe had spoken of. She lifted her hand. That map is truth, she said in clear, accented English. I was there when it was drawn. My brother marked the river line with U.S. officers. They swore peace and protection. That promise still stands. Gasps rippled through the room. Drayton sputtered. You can't prove any of this. The judge raised his hand. Enough. He turned to Marshal Corman. You know this man, Corman. Tell me plain. Do you believe Harrow guilty of cold-blooded murder? Corman looked at Gabe, then at Chloe, then finally at the judge. No, Your Honor. I believe he did what the law should have done. He defended the innocent, and I believe this railroad has twisted justice to cover its own greed. Drayton lunged forward. You'll regret. Sit down, Mr. Drayton, the judge thundered. Marshal, see this man detained for contempt. The courtroom erupted. Deputies stepped forward. Gabe rose slowly, his chains rattling once before Corman unlatched them. Chloe exhaled a sob she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The judge leaned forward. This court finds Gabriel Harrow not guilty. Further, the land known as Parcel 15 shall remain in the possession of Miss Chloe Boone, protected under existing treaty and deed. The gavel came down like thunder. Gabe turned to Chloe, voice thick. You saved me twice. She shook her head through tears. You gave me the truth to stand on. Reverend Latham smiled, tears glinting in his eyes. Mercy rejoiceth against judgment, he whispered. And as the courthouse doors opened and sunlight flooded in, Chloe felt the weight of years lift. The world looked wide and bright again, like the start of something holy and new. The news spread through Durango faster than the smoke from the rail yard. By sundown, the courthouse steps still hummed with voices. Miners, traders, even townsfolk who'd once crossed the street to avoid Gabe Harrow's shadow. Now they whispered a new name, the man who told the truth and walked free. Chloe stood outside the courthouse, her hands trembling around the map that had changed everything. The paper was soft with wear and smudged with the fingerprints of every soul who'd fought for it. Reverend Latham joined her at the steps, his smile quiet and full of meaning. "You see, child," he said, "truth has a way of climbing out of graves men dig for it." Gabe stepped into the fading light, hat in hand, the wind tugging at his coat. The iron chains were gone, but the marks they'd left around his wrists were still red. Chloe looked at him and saw not the outlaw the town once feared, but a man weathered by sin and grace both. Marshal Corman followed behind him, adjusting his badge. "Court's orders," he said simply. "You're cleared, Harrow, and I'd advise you to steer clear of trouble, but somehow I reckon you'll find it anyway." Gabe's grin was small but real. "Maybe so, but I aim to face it honest this time." Corman turned to Chloe, his expression softening. "You've got a good man there, ma'am. I've been chasing ghosts long enough to know when one's finally laid to rest." Chloe's eyes glistened. "He's more stubborn than he is good, but I'll take that." The marshal chuckled. "Then God help you both." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving dust curling in the amber light. That night, the three of them, Chloe, Gabe, and Reverend Latham, sat at a small table in the boarding house kitchen, eating stew that tasted better for being hard-earned. Outside, the town was alive with voices. Inside, there was peace. Gabe set down his spoon and leaned forward. "There's something I need to do before we go home." Chloe frowned. "What's that?" "See Drayton." Reverend Latham's brow rose. "He's still in the jailhouse, cooling off from his own lies. Let him rot." Gabe shook his head. "Can't carry hatred back with me, Reverend. It's heavy enough walking straight." Chloe said softly, "You'd forgive him?" He looked down at his rough hands. "Forgiveness don't mean forgetting. It means letting go of what keeps a man bound when his chains are already off." Later, he went. Chloe waited outside while Gabe spoke through the bars to the man who'd nearly ruined them both. She couldn't hear every word, but she saw the change. Drayton's face lost its smugness. His shoulders sagged like a man realizing for the first time what he'd become. When Gabe came back out, he looked lighter somehow. "Told him the same thing you told me once," he said. "Peace ain't earned, it's given." She smiled, tears stinging her eyes. "Then you've finally taken your share of it." At dawn, they rode home. The trail was brighter this time, the air sweet with wildflowers. When they reached the river bend, the cabin stood waiting, smoke curling from its chimney like a blessing. Chloe dismounted and looked around her little patch of land. The place she'd once feared losing now felt doubly hers, secured not by deed or line, but by mercy. Gabe joined her, removing his hat. "Never thought I'd see this valley again." "It's yours as much as mine now," she said. He looked startled. "You sure about that?" "More than I've been sure of anything." He chuckled low. "Then I'd best start earning my keep again." "Roof's tight, fences are mended," she said, smiling. "I think you've done enough." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Gabe reached out, took her hands gently, and said, "You pulled me from more than mud, Chloe Boone. You pulled me out of the kind of darkness a man carries inside. And you taught me," she whispered, "that faith isn't just prayer. It's what you do when there's no one left to call on but God." They stood like that as the sun climbed higher, spilling light over the valley and the river that had once nearly claimed them both. The wagon wheels creaked softly as they turned along the familiar bend of the San Juan River. The morning light had a gold edge to it, shimmering through pines still wet with dawn. Chloe Boone sat beside Gabe Harrow, her shawl drawn close, her eyes fixed ahead on the valley that had nearly been taken from her. The air smelled like home, wood smoke, damp soil, and wild mint. The river ran smooth and full, whispering against its banks like it was glad to see them back. Gabe held the reins steady, his big hands gentle on the lines. He hadn't said much since they'd left Durango, but his quiet wasn't the heavy silence of guilt anymore. It was peace. Earned peace. Chloe glanced sideways at him. His face was sun-darkened, his gray eyes softened. The man who'd arrived on her doorstep half dead and hunted was gone. What sat beside her now was something new, a man set free. "You're thinking too hard," he said without looking her way. She smiled faintly. "Just counting blessings. Best job there is." Ahead, the cabin came into view, a square of comfort in the open green. The roof he'd patched held firm, the smokehouse stood straight, and the little garden, left in the hands of Tommy Ryder's family, had burst into color. Yellow yarrow, purple sage, and sprigs of thyme bent gently in the breeze. Chloe pressed her hands together. She held. "She did," Gabe said, his voice low with something like reverence. They rolled to a stop beside the porch. Gabe climbed down first, offering her his hand. She hesitated only a heartbeat before taking it. His palm was rough, but his touch was careful, as though he still feared breaking something delicate. The second her boots hit the earth, tears welled in her eyes. "I thought I'd never see this place again." Gabe tipped his hat back. "Would have taken a whole railroad army to stop you." She laughed through the tears. "And you, Gabe Harrow, you look a man who could stop one." He chuckled softly. "Reckon I'll stick to mending fences, less shooting involved." They unloaded supplies together. Flour, seed, a small tin of nails Reverend Latham had insisted they take, for good measure. The quiet rhythm of work filled the morning. The scrape of sacks on the porch boards, the rustle of herbs hanging from the rafters, the steady beat of boots on packed earth. Afterward, Chloe brewed coffee on the stove, while Gabe mended a broken chair leg. The scent of roasted beans and pine pitch mingled warmly through the room. "It's strange," Chloe said, setting 2 tin cups on the table. "Everything feels smaller than I remembered." "Maybe it's us that's bigger now," Gabe replied, testing the chair with a nod. "We've seen too much to fit back into what was." She sat down across from him, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Do you ever think on what comes next?" "All the time," he said quietly. "Used to think I'd ride till I fell off the map. But after Durango, after you, I figure maybe God's done letting me wander." Her throat tightened. "And if he's planted you here?" "Then I'll take root proper," he said simply. They drank in silence for a time. Outside, the wind played with the grass. The sound of a hawk drifted from the ridge, sharp and high. The world felt clean again. That afternoon, neighbors began to arrive. First Tommy Ryder and his mother, then the blacksmith and his wife. Word of the court's ruling had spread fast. Chloe stood on the porch greeting them, her face bright with gratitude. "Miss Boone," Tommy called, waving a bundle of wildflowers nearly as big as his head. "Pa says you beat the railroad," she laughed. "Not me, Tommy. The truth did." Gabe came from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. When the neighbors saw him, a hush settled for just a heartbeat. Then Mrs. Ryder smiled and stepped forward, holding out a loaf of bread. "Glad to have you home, Mr. Harrow." "Much obliged," he said, tipping his hat. Tommy tugged his sleeve. You gonna sing again like at Miss Boone's supper?" Gabe looked at Chloe, almost sheepish. "Only if someone starts it." Chloe folded her hands. "Well then," she said softly, "maybe it's time we did." And so, with the golden light of evening spilling over the porch, they sang. "Amazing Grace" rose into the sky, the melody drifting across the fields and down to the river. By the second verse, voices from every wagon joined in, men, women, even children humming shyly. Gabe's deep baritone carried above them all, strong and trembling, like a man laying down years of sorrow one note at a time. When the last Amen faded, no one spoke for a long while. The peace that settled over the valley felt almost holy. As the neighbors left, Chloe lingered on the steps, watching lanterns bob away down the trail. Gabe stood beside her, arms crossed. "Didn't think I'd live to see a night like that," he said. "God gives more grace than we expect," she answered. "Maybe so," he said. "But I reckon you're proof he sends it through people, not just prayers." She turned toward him, her heart beating a little too fast. "And what do you mean by that, Gabe Harrow?" He smiled shyly. "I mean you've been my light in a mighty long dark." For once, she didn't deflect with humor. She just looked at him, seeing all that he was, the scars, the gentleness, the strength born of pain. "Then maybe it's time that light had a home," she said softly. He blinked. "You mean—" She nodded once, eyes shining. "I mean, I've been praying for someone to stand beside me. This land needs two hands, and this heart—" She paused, voice trembling. "It's got room again." Gabe took a step closer, his rough voice breaking. "You sure, Chloe? You know the kind of man I was." "I know the kind of man you are," she said, "and I think that's who God sent me." He bowed his head a moment, then looked up, eyes bright. "Then I'll spend the rest of my days proving him right." She smiled through her tears. "That's good enough for me." He took her hands, small, strong, healed now from rope burns, and held them as the last light of day settled over the valley. The following morning dawned clear and still. Reverend Latham arrived just after sunrise, Bible tucked under his arm, and a grin behind his beard. "I had a feeling you two wouldn't wait long," he said, when he saw them standing on the porch together. Chloe flushed. "Reverend, we haven't exactly talked about—" Gabe interrupted gently, eyes warm. "We were just about to." The Reverend chuckled. "Then I'll let you have your say, but I've got the good book ready if you decide fast." Chloe laughed, shaking her head, but she didn't protest. When the Reverend went to hitch his horse, she looked up at Gabe. "You think the valley's ready for that?" He chuckled. "Maybe not, but I reckon it'll catch up." By noon, under a sky bright as polished tin, Reverend Latham joined their hands. The ceremony was simple. Just the three of them, the sound of the river, and a hymn carried by the wind. When Gabe spoke his vow, his voice trembled. "You pulled me from death twice, Chloe Boone. Once from mud, once from shame. I promise to spend my life pulling you toward light, wherever it leads." Tears blurred her vision as she replied, "And I'll walk beside you, Gabe Harrow, come storm, drought, or rail line, because God didn't just send me to save you. He sent you to remind me life's still worth saving." Reverend Latham's voice cracked on the final blessing. "May the Lord keep you, and may His grace bind your heart stronger than law or fear." When he was gone, they stood by the riverbank, hand in hand. The water caught the sunlight and threw it back in ripples. Chloe leaned her head against Gabe's shoulder. "I think," she whispered, "this valley just found its peace." Gabe looked over the land, the green slopes, the river, the small cabin shining like a promise. Maybe peace was here all along, he said. We just had to stop running long enough to see it. That night, the stars came out clear and bright. A single lantern burned in the cabin window, warm against the dark. Inside, the table was set for two, the fire low and steady. Chloe poured coffee while Gabe carved their initials, CB and GH, into the wooden beam above the hearth. He stepped back, wiping the knife blade clean. There, proof we were here. Chloe smiled softly. And that we stayed. He slipped his arm around her shoulders. I reckon the mountains will remember too. She looked into the fire, her heart full. The same God who'd brought a weary widow and a broken mountain man through quicksand, trial, and fire had also brought them here. To light, to peace, to home. Outside, the San Juan whispered on, carrying their story downstream to where it would join the great rivers and roll on forever. The first frost came early that year, brushing the valley in silver before the sun had even cleared the ridges. Chloe Boone rose before light, listening to the house breathe around her, the soft crackle of embers, the creak of timber, the steady rhythm of Gabe Harrow's footsteps outside as he checked the horses. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped to the door. The morning air bit her cheeks, sharp but clean. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin ribbon, twisting skyward before vanishing into pale mist. "You're up early," she called softly. Gabe turned, his breath steaming in the cold. "Old habits," he said. "The world looks truest before the light finds it." Chloe smiled, stepping beside him. "And what truth are you seeing this morning?" He glanced towards the river, where frost glittered on the reeds. That a man who once thought he'd die alone now owns a full heart and a warm home. Her eyes softened. "You sound like Reverend Latham now." He chuckled low. "Don't tell him that." They stood in silence a while, the only sound the slow rush of water below. Then she said quietly, "I keep thinking of how far we've come, how one act of mercy can turn a life." Gabe nodded. Or 2 lives. She reached for his hand, and he laced his fingers through hers, the roughness of his palm grounding her in the cold. After breakfast, the day brightened, the sky crisp blue. Gabe hitched the wagon while Chloe packed bread, apples, and a jar of honey. They'd agreed to meet Nara 10 Crows by the river to set the new treaty markers, symbols of peace the valley had long been denied. As they rode, the wagon wheels crunched over frozen ruts. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and wood smoke. "I've been thinking," Chloe said, "after what we saw in Durango, how law and greed twist together, I'd like to teach the children here what real fairness looks like." Gabe looked at her with curiosity. "Schoolhouse?" "Just 1 room," she said, smiling. "A table, a stove, and enough books for whoever will come. Ute, settler, doesn't matter." He nodded slowly. "I'll build it for you." She blinked. "You mean that?" "Every word," he said. "You built peace out of ashes. The least I can do is raise the walls around it." They reached the river near midday. The cottonwoods stood tall and bare, their branches silver white. Nara and her nephew Micah waited, their horses tethered to a low branch. "Good day, grandmother," Gabe greeted. Nara smiled, eyes bright as winter sunlight. "Good day, son of mercy," she said. "The valley remembers your name now." Chloe blushed faintly. "We're honored you'd come." "Peace needs witnesses," Nara replied. She gestured to the young man beside her. "Micah will place the stones. His father marked the first treaty line. It is his turn to mend what men broke." Together they walked to the river's edge. Micah drew from his satchel a bundle of smooth river stones, each painted red with an old tribal symbol. One by one, they laid them into the soil along the bank. "This ground once divided," Nara said, kneeling. Let it now join. Chloe placed her hand atop the nearest stone, whispering, "And let truth outlast every lie told over it." Gabe knelt beside her. "Amen," he murmured. When they stood again, the sun caught on the river's surface and threw light across their faces. For a moment, it felt as though heaven itself had blessed the boundary. They returned to the cabin at mid-afternoon. Reverend Latham's horse was already tied to the fence post. He stood by the porch, hat in hand, his beard gleaming white in the sunlight. "I had a feeling you two were making history," he said with a smile. "Thought I'd read a word or two over it." Chloe laughed softly. "We could use a good word, Reverend." He opened his Bible and read from Micah 6:8. "What doth the Lord require of thee but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God? Seems to me you've done all three." Nara bowed her head. "Those are strong words, even in another tongue." "Truth sounds right in any language," Gabe said quietly. The Reverend nodded approvingly. "You've learned more about grace in a year than most men do in a lifetime, Gabe Harrow." "Had a good teacher," Gabe said, glancing at Chloe. The Reverend chuckled. "That she is." By evening, the valley was alive again. Word had spread. Neighbors came riding from miles around, some carrying gifts, others bringing food or just their gratitude. The blacksmith brought nails for Gabe's new barn, Mrs. Ryder brought stew and pie, and Tommy brought his fiddle, too eager to wait for permission before playing, a crooked tune on the porch. Chloe's cabin glowed with lamplight and laughter. For the first time in years, the valley was whole. Inside, Nara taught the children how to braid willow bark, her stories flowing like water. Micah helped Gabe hang a lantern from the rafters, while Reverend Latham blessed the meal, voice trembling with emotion. "Lord," he said, "thank you for showing us that mercy does not break men, it builds them." Outside, the stars blinked alive, clear and cold. Gabe tuned his fiddle and began to play. A hymn at first, slow and sweet, then something lighter, a waltz that had the children spinning in the yard. Chloe leaned against the doorframe, heart so full it almost hurt. Nara turned to her, smiling. When music returns, so does the spirit. "Yes," Chloe whispered. "I feel it." When Gabe's song ended, the crowd clapped, laughter rising like wind through the cottonwoods. Someone shouted for another tune, and he obliged, smiling wider than she'd ever seen him smile. For that one evening, time held still. The valley's scars didn't vanish, but they no longer bled. When the last wagon rolled away and the fire burned low, the house fell quiet. The lamplight softened to gold. Gabe stood at the hearth, carving new lines into the post above the mantel, CB plus GH, his initials intertwined with hers. "Now it's permanent," he said. "Proof we were here." Chloe brushed wood dust from his sleeve. "The world won't forget you, Gabe." He smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But I hope it remembers us as builders, not fighters." She leaned her head on his arm. "It will." They stepped outside again. The frost glittered under a full moon, every blade of grass tipped with silver. The river hummed faintly below, its song softer than before. "You remember what you told me that night you were arrested?" Chloe asked quietly. "You said I shouldn't waste prayers on you." He nodded. "And you didn't listen." "I never do when I'm right." He laughed softly, the sound carrying into the stillness. "Guess you proved prayer works after all." She looked up at the stars. "Prayer's only the door. God's the one who walks through it." He took her hand, thumb brushing over the faded scars. "I'll never forget the day these hands pulled me from the mud." "And I'll never forget the day you stopped sinking," she said gently. They stood side by side, until the horizon began to pale. The first light crept slow and tender across the valley, setting the frost aglow. As dawn rose, Gabe fetched 2 tin cups and poured coffee. "To peace," he said. She raised hers. "To mercy." They drank, smiling over the rims. The valley woke around them, cows lowing, a rooster calling from a far-off farm, the crackle of the first wagon wheels heading toward town. Chloe breathed deep. "Do you hear that? Sounds like life coming back." "Sounds like a beginning," Gabe said. They went, about the morning's chores together, laughter breaking easy between them. He mended the barn door while she gathered herbs by the fence. When they met again at the porch, he was holding a small wooden cross he'd carved from leftover pine. "For the one who saw fit to save us both," he said quietly, nailing it above the doorway. Chloe's eyes shone. He surely knew what he was doing. He grinned. "Guess he's better at rescuing folks than I was." She chuckled. "That's saying something, considering how you came out of that quicksand." Later, as the sun climbed high, Nara and Micah passed by once more on their way home. The elder lifted her hand in blessing. "Keep the river clean, the fire warm, and the heart kind," she called. Chloe waved back. "You'll always have a place here." The riders disappeared into the trees, their figures swallowed by gold light. Gabe turned to her, voice soft. "You ever think how one choice, just one, can change every road after?" She nodded. "I think about it every day." That evening, they sat again on the porch. The sky burned with sunset, streaked pink and violet. A chill moved through the air, the kind that hinted of snow. Chloe pulled the quilt over them both. "You reckon peace will last?" she asked. Gabe watched the horizon. "If we keep tending it like your garden, pull the weeds, water the roots, it just might." She smiled. "Then we'll tend it together." "Always," he said. They watched the last light fade from the mountains. The river shimmered faintly under the first stars. Inside, the lamp glowed warm behind the window, a small but steady light in a world that had seen too much dark. "Look," Gabe said quietly. "The dawn's already coming back around." Chloe tilted her head. "Even before night's done." He nodded. "That's how hope works." When the stars filled the sky, they rose to go inside. Gabe paused at the door, glancing back at the valley, the place that had broken and healed him all at once. "Chloe," he said softly, "you reckon this is what heaven feels like?" She smiled, taking his hand. "Maybe heaven feels like coming home." He drew her close, and the two of them stepped inside, the door closing gently behind. The fire flickered bright, throwing gold across the room. Outside, the frost thickened, the river murmured, and the valley slept in peace. And as the dawn finally reached full light, the home they built stood solid and warm against the wild, a quiet proof that mercy, once planted, can outlive every storm. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.